Okay, awesome. Is the share screen stuff working?
Yes.
Yes, we can see your
Oh,
presentation.
perfect. Okay. So yeah, I really appreciate the introductions. I could hear most of them. I think sometimes I know the audio in rooms is challenging. So if you have questions, feel free to stop me. Either like we can have questions at the end. If you have questions during the presentation, just stop me. Um, Also, if there's anything that goes wrong, like you can't hear me or whatever, like just stop me too. But I was just going to share some results. We don't have all the final results, but I have some research going on in my lab with a couple of different students looking at transfer of passive immunity in lambs. So it's just going to share kind of where we're at. So the majority of the research that I'm going to share with you comes from Jasmine Fraser. So she is a PhD student who will be finishing up this fall. She did a very large observational study that we'll share some results. I also had a fourth year undergrad student with me this past year who did a project as well, looking at uh, it was the same farm. We were looking at a different lambing group. And then we had lots of other help on the farm to do this project. We had all kinds of vet students and undergrad students. And then we had probably our best little helper that was wrangling like two lambs at a time. So we had lots of help on this project. Okay, so what I'll just go over today, we'll talk about what transfer passive immunity is, why it's important. We'll look at some work that we did using a Brix refractometer, so an on-farm tool to look at transfer of passive immunity in lambs. And then look at some analyses we did to look at associations between these levels of transfer of passive immunity and risk of mortality. We're also going to do some work. This stuff, I'll just kind of share with you what is being explored, but kind of currently in analysis of, if we know that lambs that have lower transfer of passive immunity levels are more likely to be at risk of dying, what then is associated with that? Like, what can we do to help ensure lambs are at lower risk? So I'll kind of share where we're at that way, and then some next steps. Okay, so what is transfer of passive immunity? So ruminants, so cattle, sheep, goats, they're all born without, they're called A-gamma globulinemic, which essentially means the mom's immunoglobulins don't cross the bloodstream through the placenta. So like humans, dogs, cats, they have transplacental transfer. So like we're born with some immunoglobulins from our mother versus ruminants, they're born without any. So they're essentially born with no antibodies circulating in their bloodstream. And that's why it's really important for them to consume colostrum early in life, because the colostrum is what is going to give them antibodies that then get absorbed through their gut, and give them those, what we call it passive immunity, because the lambs aren't actively generating antibodies from their own immune system. But these antibodies that come from their dam are in the bloodstream for, depending on the particular antibody, they might be there from weeks to months. And they're giving the lambs immunity against whatever pathogens the dams have been exposed to over their life. So of course, lots of other reasons why colostrum is important. It's providing, right, like lots of calories and nutrients for these lambs right at birth. But another big importance of colostrum is to transfer those antibodies to the lambs and give them those antibodies in the bloodstream. And over the first weeks to months of life, that's when lambs are then developing their own active immune system. But the maternal immunity from the dam is providing them protection while they're developing their own immune system. So I kind of just stole this from somewhere on the web. So this is kind of talking about vaccination. So we don't have to look at all of this, but it's kind of a nice visual of kind of what happens with those antibody levels. So don't worry about the vaccines, but essentially at birth, they don't have any antibody levels in their blood, but they're going to hopefully consume colostrum and have those antibodies transfer across the gut into the bloodstream. So they're going to get this nice rise in circulating antibody levels, which is going to slowly decline over time. And it varies a bit depending on which antibody it is. And then over that time period, the lamb's going to develop their own immunity through natural exposure. It can also be through vaccination, which is what this kind of schematic is showing. But basically, as the maternal antibodies decline, the lambs are going to develop their own antibodies with their own active immunity. Okay, so the big component of this passive immunity in lambs is colostrum. And so it's really important that they consume colostrum that has the kind of, we call it 4 Qs for lack of better words, but quality is really important. So ensuring that the colostrum has a high level of antibodies within it. Also quantity. So we want the colostrum to be nice and concentrated in antibodies, but also that the lamb is able to consume enough of it. They have to consume it soon enough because the ability for those proteins, the antibodies, to go across the gut into the bloodstream, it's only present early in life. So early in life, their gut is actually kind of leaky, and so those molecules can cross the gut barrier. But after they are, and again, it depends a little bit, but after the first, like for sure, 6 to 12 hours of life, they're not able to absorb those antibodies, and it kind of declines over time. So the earlier they can consume the colostrum, the more they are able to absorb those antibodies. The last one isn't quite a Q, but we kind of make it work. But squeaky clean is the other one. So kind of two things there. So one is because they're born with that gut barrier that's kind of open so that the antibodies can go across. That also means that pathogens are more likely to cross the gut too. So if lambs happen to get, a mouthful of manure before they are able to consume colostrum, that's going to put them at even higher risk than if they consumed a little bit of, manure or got manure in their mouth later in life. And then the other part too is certainly there's lots of work in calves showing that when we have high bacterial loads that young animals are exposed to, it actually interferes with the ability of the gut to transport those antibodies. So getting lots of colostrum that's nice, high quality, soon enough after birth, and having it be clean and lambs in a clean environment are all going to kind of contribute to lambs getting the maximum amount of those maternal antibodies. Okay, so why is this immunity important? So we said that, yeah, lambs are born without circulating antibodies and they take time to develop their own immune system. And so certainly having antibodies available from their dam is important if they're going to be exposed to any of those disease-causing agents. And certainly, like all the literature throughout the globe, I mean, lamb mortality is a challenge, everywhere. Certainly it varies, between breeds, between management systems, between years or seasons. Sometimes things are a bigger challenge than other times. Some global numbers, 10 to 35%, but I mean, it varies quite a bit, right? Certainly there's farms that can have really low lamb mortality rates. When we have more prolific breeds, that tends to naturally increase that a bit. But certainly at any point in time, certainly some farms struggle with higher mortality rates. What that comes from can be, of course, lots of different causes. For sure, starvation exposure, especially with wintertime lambings, can be a big deal. Dystocia, but also infectious disease. And certainly, consuming enough colostrum early in life is going to be protective against the kind of starvation exposure issue, but also hopefully contributing towards reducing the risk of infectious disease by providing them with those that maternal antibody levels. And certainly looking at passive or transfer of passive immunity in cattle, there's been all kinds of research in that area, very strong links between antibody levels in calves and protection against mortality, lower disease rates, better growth rates, very strong links there. And certainly in sheep, there is research in that area, but far less. And I think one of the challenges too in sheep is that, we have so many different breeds, very, very different management systems. And so sometimes, looking at research that's been done in one management system in one breed, how well does that relate to another one? I think often in sheep, we probably need more research to look at all those kind of diverse situations. But yeah, there really is a need for more research in sheep, kind of trying to examine that link between antibody levels and mortality. So that's kind of what we have done. So we looked at both lamb blood levels and as well we looked at colostrum with the Brix refractometer. So I don't know if any of you guys in the meeting have used a refractometer before for different things. You can use a digital one or an optical one on the right. It's just measuring kind of total solids within a liquid. So I think I have not used it for this purpose, but I know people that do maple syrup maybe use it to look at the kind of concentration of sugars. Or I think I've talked to somebody else that uses it also with their pasture to look at sugar content in grass. But essentially just put a liquid on top of that optical refractometer, and then you can just visually read a level of percent solids. The digital one, you just put whatever the liquid is in there, and then it just reads it digitally. But this is a tool that's been used quite a bit in dairy cattle to look at total solids, both in the colostrum as a measure of quality. So how concentrated are the antibodies in the colostrum? And then also looking at blood. So looking at the taking blood sample from calves, spinning it, looking at the serum, because we know in early life, the total solids in the serum correlates really well with the antibody levels that that calf has. Again, that research really hasn't been done extensively in sheep, so that's kind of one of the things that we looked at here, because this is a really simple tool, pretty quick and easy to do. So one thing we did was on our large observational study, we took blood samples from lambs. So we sampled lambs when they were between 2 and 7 days of age. And we just have a little video here. You can see a little bit different than blood sampling in calves. We just use a small catheter, but pretty quick. Restraining the lambs is pretty simple. We don't take very much blood. So yeah, we bled quite a few lambs to look at antibody levels in the lambs and also colostrum samples too. So I'm going to share some results. So this is kind of the way that our larger study worked. So go back there. So we had a group of about 300 ewes that lambed in February that we looked at. We also had another lambing group in October that had I think just over 100 ewes. So we looked at these ewes from breeding to lambing. So every 6 weeks, we got a weight on them, did a body condition score, looked at things like fecal egg count and FAMACHA score. So looking at kind of parasite load. And then we also knew these ewes parity in age. When they lambed, we captured things like litter size, birth weight, sex of the lambs, if they got any colostrum supplementation. We took a colostrum sample from the ewe, and then lambs got a blood sample between that 2 and 7 days of age. And for the larger study, they got the Brix refractometer, so kind of the simple handheld kind of on-farm one. And then we also sent those samples away to get IgG levels done in a lab, which are like kind of gold standard for what the actual antibody level is, versus Brix is just looking at kind of total solids, which we know in calves is a good proxy. So that's what we wanted to look at too. For our lambs, we followed them out to 100 days. They were weaned at 50 days. We got weights on them at 50 and 100 days to calculate average daily gain. We recorded all of their mortality events and any illnesses. If they were treated, that was recorded too. And then, yeah, so for our samples, again, we looked at them with the Brix refractometer on farm and then sent them off to a lab in Saskatoon to do the antibody levels. Okay, so what did we learn? So first, from looking at how well does the on-farm test predict the actual antibody levels, it was pretty good. So here are kind of all of our samples from colostrum. So this is from about 300 ewes. It had moderate correlation statistically, which actually is pretty good for a test. So even though higher might be nicer, it's actually pretty good from a statistical standpoint to represent it. So doing a Brix reading on colostrum can give us a pretty accurate measure of how concentrated those antibody levels are. And then the serum, so we took our blood samples from our lambs and looked at the serum Brix values versus the antibody levels at the lab, and this had a very strong correlation. So our on-farm test seemed to be performing pretty well for both colostrum and blood. We also had a quick look to see because our ewes were sampled as soon as possible after lambing, which we didn't have. We had lots of, we had our very hardworking PhD student, Jasmine. She had lots of people helping too, but we weren't on farm like 24/7. So while they tried to get samples early after lambing, some of them were a little bit further out. So she just broke down her samples by time to see if there was a difference in how well they correlated based on, how soon she took her sample after birth. And basically, it was still pretty good. So we didn't see any like major changes over time. So it was still a good test, regardless of if we were taking colostrum right at birth or like up to 12 hours later. And then similar with the lambs, again in calves, typically, or at least from the literature, it's recommended to take blood samples before 7 days of age, but after 48 hours of age to reflect the antibody levels. And it looked to be pretty similar in lambs. So we had good correlation values regardless of the age. We also had a look at lambs that were on the automated milk feeder versus those that weren't. On this farm, it was just lambs that the dams couldn't raise that were put on an automated milk feeder. And then supplemented with colostrum supplementation versus non-supplemented, but we had good correlation there. So it seemed like the test worked well kind of in all scenarios. Okay, so we know that the Brix values at least measure antibody levels pretty well in our lambs, but then we wanted to know, like, does this matter? Like, if we know a lamb has a lower value, is that worse? And so I'll share results from the two different studies. So this is from our October lambing group. We had 227 lambs. The values that we got ranged from 4 to 13 on Brix with a mean of 9. And just going to share the birth weights too. These are Ritos. The birth weights range from 1.4 to 6 kilos with a mean of 3.3 kilos. So looking at this is a kind of multivariate model. So this is a model where we offered different variables to the model, but the final model that we built included our serum Brix as well as birth weight and sex. So birth weight certainly was, and this is, sorry, looking at the outcome of mortality. So we're saying how associated is the Brix value with mortality. So we are controlling in here for birth weight and sex. Birth weight in our data set was highly correlated with higher birth weights being at lower risk of dying, which makes sense in our data set. And also the females in our data set were less likely to die compared to males. But I guess the big thing here is just that our Brix values, even when we controlled for weight and sex, were correlated with the outcome. So we had an odds ratio of 0.81, which basically means that for every 1% difference in that Brix value, the lambs were 1.25 times more likely to die. So pretty substantial correlation considering we have pretty good ranges there. So 4 to 13. So if a lamb was, 9 versus another lamb being 11, that made a difference or was associated with a difference in terms of risk of dying. And this is, throughout the study period. So that was our October group. This is our February group. We had more mortality in our February group. We had a bit of a pneumonia outbreak. So this is just kind of showing we did in our October group, we didn't do any postmortems on the lambs that died. In the February group, everything got a postmortem. So this is just kind of showing here how many lambs died before 2 days of age, 2 days to 7 days, 7 days to weaning, which was around 50 days, and then post-weaning. And we saw we had a fairly good chunk of pneumonia happening in that 7 days to weaning. So that's kind of what the mortality looked like in that February group. And then looking at, we had about 600 lambs that we followed there. Just kind of keeping that there so you can kind of see what the mortality looked like. And then we had the same overall mortality associations. So here we had both the lab values and our bricks on farm values, but they kind of basically said the same thing, and they were very similar to our October group. So for every 1% decrease in bricks values, lambs were at 1.25 times the risk of dying. We did break it out a little bit for different time periods, and again, we have less mortality early and late. So we see some different things statistically, but I think the important thing here is this was our largest mortality range, which was 7 days to weaning for these guys, and there was an association with the bricks there. So the idea there might be that that bricks value is telling us kind of what the antibody levels are in that lamb, and that is making a difference potentially in that pneumonia risk period for that group. Okay. The other thing that we kind of looked at with this bricks values is a cut point, because that's often what's used in cattle in terms of, because when we're taking blood, we're looking at individual lambs, but the kind of important part is not necessarily what an individual lamb is, but looking at kind of how is the farm doing overall. So in calves, there's well-established cut points where, we want at least 95% of calves to be over a certain cut point, and so there you could go take a sample of a group of lambs, or in the case of previous work, calves, and see kind of how we're doing overall. We may have one or two lambs fail, but as long as you have overall more than 95% passing from the calf literature, that shows that passive transfer is not an issue in that group. So we kind of wanted to look at that too. So Jasmine looked at that statistically as to kind of where should the cut point be on bricks for lambs in terms of saying, yes, this lamb has enough antibodies, or no, it's too low. And here, this is just kind of showing where we're kind of trying to fit a line, and looking at kind of what's the best cut point that optimizes kind of sensitivity, specificity. And essentially we got a cut point of 8 that had pretty good specificity, not as great sensitivity, but again, this is looking at overall mortality. So it doesn't mean that it's the only predictor of mortality, which is kind of why it's a little bit not very sensitive, but it's quite specific. So essentially, if a lamb is under 8 on bricks, they are significantly more likely to be at risk of dying. If they're over 8, that doesn't mean that they're not going to die, because something else could happen potentially. That's not associated with their antibody level, but being under 8 puts them at risk. So this is potentially helpful, if we're going in and maybe taking a blood sample on a group of lambs to see kind of where the farm is at, where that group is at. We want to be seeing most of the lambs being over that 8% on bricks. Okay, the last thing, or a couple last things I'll just chat about here is some of the work that Jasmine's currently doing is she's looking at now. So now that she's established that the on-farm test works well, it's associated with higher mortality, and then we can back up and say, okay, what things are associated with having lambs that have that higher bricks value. So here she's looking at things like the pre-lambing factors that she's got in her data set, as well as some of those lambing time factors like sex and birth weight, litter size, to try to see which lambs are more at risk. Is it the lambs from larger litters? Is it lambs with a lower birth weight? Or, is it also lambs from dams that have maybe lower body condition score, or maybe higher body condition score? So kind of looking at those factors. So don't have results from that one yet, but that's what she's looking at right now. And then the last thing I thought I would just mention is our next steps. So after this particular project wraps up, this has all been looking at, it's been nice to have such a large data set. This is probably the largest data set in this kind of area in the literature that's been looked at. So I think it gives us a lot of power to kind of look at those potential risk factors. But one of the challenges is limited to, we did all this work on one farm. We did this work with a prolific breed with Ritos. But our next step is to kind of generalize this a bit more and kind of have a look at what do these BRICS values look like on Ontario sheep farms. So we're hoping to get some funding from OMAFA this year to do some of that work. So to instead of kind of doing a really deep dive on a really large data set, what we would like to do is go to lots of farms, different breeds, different management systems, take a snapshot of, come during that, during a lambing period, when lambs might be eligible to have a blood sample, take a blood samples from a group of lambs to see kind of where that passive transfer is at on those farms. And then potentially with all of that data, look at kind of those farm level factors like what's associated with having kind of more success in that passive transfer area. Okay, so that's kind of the summary of what our research group has been doing. If you guys have any questions, or if you can feel free to ask now, I have my email address there too. If anybody has questions or comments or anything like that, definitely would love to hear from people.
Great job, Charlotte. Thank you.
That's very good. I have one question. And you might have said this too, but did the BRICS values on the lambs that had colostrum supplementation, were they any different from those that had colostrum from the moms?
Oh, yes, no, that's a good question. And yeah, no, we didn't touch on that. So while the test was still a good test for those ones, the values were lower for sure. I mean, one of the challenges with that is for like this was an observational study, so we didn't like interfere with kind of normal farm management. So the lambs that got supplemented would be probably like poor doing or weaker lambs to begin with. But yes, they certainly had lower BRICS values when you compared them to lambs that didn't receive colostrum supplementation, for sure. Doesn't mean that colostrum supplementation is bad, just that those are higher risk lambs.
Right off the bat, you're right. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for?
I have another one just sort of to bounce off of the last question. Just wondering, in Ontario or in Canada, is there regulations on minimum BRICS requirements for supplemented colostrum?
We don't have this, we don't have this information. So the question was whether or not there are regulations as to what a minimum BRICS value would be for a supplement. Is there such a thing, Charlotte, or do we not have the data to support that?
Oh, so certainly colostrum supplementation products all have on the label how many grams of IgG they have in them. So those are standardized. So when you buy like a colostrum supplementation product, it will tell you the amount of antibodies in it. The challenge is, and I don't say this like, I think colostrum supplementation can be a really important tool. But one of the challenges with colostrum supplementation with the colostrum replacers is that they're all bovine source. So all the antibodies in them come from cows. They're formulated for lambs or like, lambs and kids from a nutritional standpoint, but they're not, they don't come from sheep. So there are antibodies in them. How well those antibodies protect lambs, I don't know, and there's not good research on that. For sure, I think like best bet is to get colostrum from the dam. If that's not possible for lots of different reasons, colostrum supplementation is great because it's the nutritional. I mean, I think it's really great from the nutritional standpoint, right? Because you're going to prevent lambs starving out. They need the fat, protein, calories, all of that stuff that's coming from the colostrum replacer. So that's really important. But the challenge, I think, in sheep and goats is that, there's nowhere globally that has replacers that are actually from small ruminant sources. And so we're kind of missing out on the antibody supplementation, versus cattle. It's very, well, there's lots of research on it, but also in cattle, it's more clear, like, when you supplement calves, you want to give them X number of grams of IgG, like I think it's 150 at this point now per calf. Versus in sheep and goats, we don't really know if the antibodies in that replacer are helpful. I mean, but I guess the caveat is that the replacer is helpful because the nutrient content is so important for them. But wherever possible, if they can be getting, dam colostrum, that's where they're going to get the antibodies from. Hopefully that wasn't or let me know if that wasn't clear.
Why do they not have lamb or, and not just bovine? Is it the industry not demand it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I don't have a good answer. I think when I was in private practice for a while, and I mean, because we sold it and everything, and like I always knew that, our replacers were all bovine source, but I think I just assumed that like, oh, it's because, it's North America, we have small ruminant market. Elsewhere in the world, they'll have sheep-based colostrum replacers, but they don't. It's globally like this, which when I learned that a number of years ago, that surprised me. But I don't know if it's also because maybe, our type of like the farms that use replacers more often, right, which are the more prolific, more like accelerated management styles. I don't know if it's because like that system doesn't exist in lots of other places of the world where there are lots of sheep, but maybe there's not a lot of need for supplementation. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't actually know. But yeah, it's a challenge for lots of areas. And yeah, and I hope I'm not saying anything, negative towards using replacers, because certainly like it's like, I mean, if you can milk another ewe and have saved frozen colostrum, that's fantastic, but that's, not practical in many situations. And so having a replacer where you can just mix it up, feed the lamb, that's still really, really good, because it's, achieving all the other goals of like getting nutrients into that animal. But yeah, I think from the antibody standpoint, it's certainly not as perfect as having something from the dam.
Got a question. How much colostrum is needed to get the antibodies from the dam if we were to milk it out and try and put it in an ice cube? Do we need like a whole bottle, or can we switch it up after we get the antibodies from the dam to a powdered replacer?
Yeah, so like for sure for like dam colostrum, like the typical recommendation is 50 mils per kilo. And then having that like four feedings within the first 24 hours of that volume. So that's just kind of a generic recommendation. If you can check your colostrum, we don't really know at this point what a great Brix cut point would be for that. It's probably in the like mid 20s for seeing if the colostrum is good. But yeah, I think we don't have those like exact numbers in terms of what the Brix should be from the colostrum relative to the amount fed. But I think just in general feeding, yeah, 50 mils per kilo per meal, and then having like 4 meals on the first day from the dam would be ideal. The most important meal is the first one, but those additional meals over the first 24 hours will provide additional benefits with those antibodies too. And then yeah, sorry, and then if you're using replacer, yeah, then I think similar volumes can be used. Just check like the mixing directions for the replacers, but I think for most replacers we generally use the same volumes. But yeah, it's not as well established as like in calves where we know exactly how much we need to feed.
Hey, well, thank you very much. Maybe your research someday will lead to better quality colostrum for those that have to supplement, and I look forward to hearing the continuation of your research results.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no.
Thanks very much, Charlotte.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, before we continue, we have two people that have joined us. Who want to introduce yourself?
I'm Bruce McEwen. I have a small cooperative, but